The security cameras at LaGuardia Airport captured everything. At exactly 11:47 p.m. on a cold December night, a well-dressed couple walked briskly toward the departure gates, their designer luggage rolling smoothly behind them. But if you looked closely at the footageâ, really lookedâ, you'd see something that would make your blood run cold. 20 feet behind them, completely alone and clutching a worn stuffed elephant, sat a 7-year-old boy on a metal bench. He was rocking back and forth, his lips moving in silent repetition of words only he could hear. The couple never looked back. Not once. They simply vanished into the crowd, boarding their flight to Paris, while their autistic son remained in Terminal C, abandoned like forgotten luggage. What happened next would change 3 lives foreverâ. The child's, his parents', and that of Victoria Chen, the billionaire tech mogul, who was about to discover that sometimes the most important business decisions aren't made in boardrooms, but in the broken spaces where humanity reveals its truest face. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Victoria Chen had built her empire on precision. Every minute of her day was calculated. Every decision measured against profit margins and quarterly projections. At 38, she was the youngest woman to ever helm a Fortune 500 tech company, and her calendar tonight proved Euro, a red-eye flight from New York to San Francisco, where a crucial merger meeting awaited her at 8 a.m. sharp. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. She moved through the airport like a force of nature, her Louboutin heels clicking against the polished floor in perfect rhythm. Her personal assistant had already confirmed her first-class seat, her driver was arranged for San Francisco, and her presentation was loaded on her tablet. Everything was under control, exactly how she liked it. But Victoria Chen was about to learn that the universe doesn't care about your schedule. The first thing she noticed was the crying. Not the typical airport sounds of delayed flights or frustrated traveler's. This was different. Raw. Desperate. The sound of a child, lost in a world that suddenly made no sense. Victoria paused near gate C7. Her phone pressed to her ear as she discussed stock options with her legal team. Through her peripheral vision, she caught sight of a small figure hunched on a nearby bench. A boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, rocking rhythmically while tears streamed down his face. His lips moved constantly, whispering something she couldn't make out from this distance. "Victoria? Are you there?" Her lawyer's voice crackled through the phone. "Hold on," she said, lowering the device. Her eyes scanned the area around the child. No parents, no guardian, just airport staff walking by, seemingly oblivious to the crisis unfolding in plain sight. The boy's rocking intensified, and Victoria noticed something that made her chest tighten. He was clutching a stuffed elephant, so worn the gray fabric had turned nearly white in places. One of the elephant's ears was partially torn, held together with what looked like medical tape. This wasn't a new toy. This was a lifeline. Victoria ended her call mid-sentence and walked toward the bench. As she got closer, she could finally hear what the boy was repeating. "Mama comes back. Mama comes back. 67 minutes. Mama comes back." "Excuse me, sweetheart," Victoria said softly, crouching down to the child's eye level. The boy's rocking stopped abruptly. His eyes, the brightest blue she'd ever seen, darted everywhere except toward her face. 67 minutes, he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Mama said, 67 minutes. Mama comes back." Victoria's throat constricted. She glanced at the departure board. It had been well over 67 minutes since the last Paris flight had taken off. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Tommy. Tommy Richard Morrison. 7 years old. December 15th, Mama comes back in 67 minutes. His speech was precise, almost mechanical, as if he'd rehearsed these facts countless times. Victoria felt something crack open inside her chest. This wasn't just abandonment to Euro. This was betrayal of the cruelest kind. Someone had given this child a specific time frame, knowing full well they would never return. She looked around desperately for airport security, for anyone who might help. But the late-night terminal was sparse, and the few staff members she could see seemed overwhelmed with their own duties. "Tommy," she said carefully, "I'm Victoria. I'm going to sit with you for a while, okay?" For the first time, Tommy's eyes flickered toward her, though they never quite met hers. "Victoria Chen," he said suddenly. Founded Technova Solutions at age 26. Net worth $3.7 billion. Featured on Forbes cover November 2023. Victoria froze. "How do you Euro? I read about you in Business Weekly, at the doctor's office." Tommy continued in his matter-of-fact tone. "Mama said you were mean to people. But you don't sound mean. You sound sad like me." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Here was this abandoned child, alone and terrified, yet still trying to comfort her, because she sounded sad. When was the last time anyone Euro, had shown her that kind of pure, instinctive kindness? "Tommy, where are your parents right now? Did they tell you where they were going?" Tommy's rocking resumed, more violently this time. "Paris." Mama said Paris was for grown-ups. Too loud for Tommy. Too many people. "Tommy stays here. 67 minutes. But," his voice broke, 67 minutes is gone." Victoria closed her eyes, fighting back a wave of rage so intense it scared her. She had built her fortune on strategic thinking, on seeing opportunities where others saw obstacles. But this wasn't business a Euro. This was a child whose world had just shattered. "Tommy, I need to ask you something very important. Do you have any other family? Grandparents? An aunt? Or uncle?" "Grandma Morrison lives in Tucson," Tommy said, his voice growing smaller. "But Mama said she doesn't want Tommy either. Too difficult. Too much work." Victoria felt her composure cracking. This boya Euro, this beautiful, brilliant boy who could recite her biography from memoria Euro, had been discarded by everyone who was supposed to love him. She made a decision that would have shocked her board of directors, her shareholders, and perhaps most of all, herself. "Tommy, how would you like to come with me? Just for tonight. We'll figure everything else out tomorrow." Tommy stopped rocking. For a long moment, he was completely still. Then, in the smallest voice imaginable, he asked, "You won't leave Tommy at 67 minutes?" "Never," Victoria whispered, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "I promise you, Tommy, I will never, ever leave you counting minutes." She had no idea how to care for a child, let alone an autistic child who had just experienced the ultimate betrayal. She knew nothing about sensory sensitivities or routine disruptions or the complex needs that Tommy would have. But as she watched him carefully place his worn elephant in his small backpack and stand up with the careful movements of someone much older than his 7 years, Victoria understood something fundamental had shifted inside her. For the first time in her adult life, money and power and quarterly reports didn't matter. What mattered was the small hand that hesitantly reached for hers, and the whispered, "Okay," that carried more trust than any business deal she'd ever negotiated. As they walked toward the airline counter together, Victoria already calling her assistant to cancel her San Francisco meetings, she couldn't have known that the security cameras were still recording. They captured the exact moment a billionaire learned that the most valuable acquisition of her career wouldn't appear on any balance sheet a Euro. It would appear every morning at breakfast, asking if the pancakes could please be cut into exactly 8 pieces, no more, no less. But they also captured something else. In the reflection of the terminal's large windows, you could see the distant figures of a well-dressed couple boarding their Paris flight, never once looking back at the small boy they'd left behind. They thought they were escaping a burden. They had no idea they'd just handed their greatest treasure to someone who would cherish it. The airline representative's nameplate read Sandra Williams, and her expression shifted from professional courtesy to deep concern as Victoria explained the situation. Behind the counter, Sandra had seen many things in her 15 years at LaGuardia Airport: missed connections, family emergencies, even the occasional celebrity meltdown. But nothing quite like this. "Ma'am, I need to be very clear," Sandra said quietly, her eyes moving between Victoria and Tommy, who was now sitting in a nearby chair, methodically organizing and reorganizing the few items in his backpack. "Child abandonment is a serious matter. We'll need to contact airport security and child protective services immediately." Victoria felt her stomach drop. "How long does that process typically take? For placement? Could be hours, could be days, depending on available foster homes." Sandra's voice softened as she watched Tommy. "And honestly, ma'am, finding emergency placement for a special needs child at this hour, it's not going to be easy." The thought of Tommy being shuffled through an overloaded system, possibly separated from his beloved elephant, possibly placed with strangers who didn't understand his needs, made Victoria feel physically sick. What if? What if I wanted to take responsibility for him tonight? Temporarily, of course, until proper arrangements can be made. Sandra studied Victoria carefully. Designer clothes, confident posture, speaking with the authority of someone accustomed to solving problems with resources and determination. But there was something else in her eyes a euro, something raw and protective that Sandra recognized as maternal instinct, even if Victoria herself might not have understood it yet. "Ma'am, you're talking about taking home a child you've never met. A child with special needs who's just experienced severe trauma. Are you prepared for what that might involve?" Victoria glanced over at Tommy. He had finished organizing his backpack and was now tracing patterns on the chair's armrest with his finger, his lips moving silently as he counted. 7 across, then 7 down, then 7 across again. Everything in perfect sevens. "No," Victoria admitted. "I'm not prepared at all. But look around a euro. Who else is here for him? Who else is even paying attention?" Sandra followed her gaze. The terminal was quieter now. Most gates closed for the night. A few janitors worked methodically, their movements creating a rhythm that seemed to calm Tommy slightly. But otherwise, they were essentially alone. "There are footageâ euro," Sandra began. "There's also a child who's been abandoned by his parents and promised someone would return for him in 67 minutes. Victoria's voice carried the same steely determination that had built her empire. "How many 67-minute promises do you think he can survive?" Sandra was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached under the counter and pulled out a thick folder of paperwork. "I'll need to make some calls," she said. "And you'll need to fill out emergency guardian forms. This isn't a adoption euro. It's temporary protective custody while we locate proper family placement or work with social services. You understand that?" "I understand." "And ma'am, I need you to understand something else." Sandra's voice dropped even lower. "Children, like Tomya Euro, they form attachments quickly, especially after trauma. If you do this, you can't just walk away when it gets difficult. He's already been abandoned once, tonight." Victoria felt the weight of Sandra's words settle over her like a lead blanket. She thought about her penthouse apartment, with its glass walls and sharp corners, and complete lack of anything remotely child-friendly. She thought about her 16-hour workdays, her travel schedule, Her complete ignorance about things like bedtime routines and dietary restrictions and sensory overloads. Then she thought about Tommy's precise voice, saying, "You don't sound mean. You sound sad like me. I won't walk away." Victoria said quietly, "Whatever this requires, however long it takes to find him a proper home, I won't walk away." Sandra nodded and reached for her phone. "I'm calling my supervisor and child services. This is going to take a while. You might want to talk to Tomya Euro. Explain what's happening." Children with autism often do better when they understand the plan. Victoria approached Tommy's chair carefully, the way she might approach a skittish animal. He didn't look up from his pattern tracing, but she could see his shoulders tense slightly. "Tommy, I need to tell you what's going to happen next." "Next is important," Tommy said, without looking up. Mama didn't tell Tommy about next. Just 67 minutes. "You're right. Next is very important. The nice lady behind the counter is making some phone calls. She needs to talk to some people about where you'll sleep tonight." Tommy's tracing stopped abruptly. "Sleep where?" "Well, I was hoping you might like to come home with me. Just for tonight. I have a big apartment with lots of quiet rooms." "Quiet is good," Tommy said softly. "Paris is loud." Mama said Paris is too loud for Tommy. Victoria felt her heart break a little more. "My place is very quiet, and we can get pancakes for breakfast if you want. Do you like pancakes?" For the first time since she'd approached him, Tommy looked directly at her footageâ Euro. Not her eyes, but her face. The contact lasted maybe 3 seconds before he looked away again. But in those 3 seconds, Victoria saw intelligence and pain and a desperate hope that he was trying very hard to suppress. "8 pieces," Tommy said quietly. "8 pieces? Pancakes have to be 8 pieces, not 7, not 9. 8 pieces or Tommy can't eat them." Victoria felt something warm unfurl in her chest. 8 pieces. "I can definitely do 8 pieces." Tommy picked up his elephant and hugged it tightly to his chest. "Elephant comes too?" "Elephant definitely comes too." Behind them, Sandra was speaking in low, urgent tones on her phone. Victoria caught fragments Euro, emergency placement, special needs, temporary guardian. The bureaucracy was grinding into motion, but slowly, the way bureaucracies always did. Victoria pulled out her own phone and sent a text to her assistant. "Cancel everything for the next week." "Yes, everything, including the Morrison merger. Something more important has come up." Her assistant's response came back almost immediately. "Everything. Victoria, the Morrison deal is worth $200 million. Victoria looked at Tommy, still clutching his elephant, still tracing sevens with his free hand, still believing somewhere deep inside that maybe, just maybe, this time an adult would keep their promise to him. She typed back, "Some things are worth more than money. Cancel it all." An hour later, Sandra had worked her bureaucratic magic. Emergency temporary guardianship paperwork was signed, caseworkers were notified, and a follow-up meeting was scheduled for the next morning. Victoria had provided references, undergone a hasty background check, and given detailed contact information. "This is highly irregular," the child services supervisor had said over the phone. "But given the circumstances and the child's needs, we're willing to allow overnight placement pending full evaluation tomorrow." As they prepared to leave the airport, Victoria realized she had no idea how to transport a child. Her usual car service involved sleek sedans with no car seats and drivers who weren't used to passengers who might need extra time or patience. "Tommy, have you ever been in a taxi?" she asked. "Taxi is loud," Tommy said, putting his hands over his ears preemptively. Victoria made another call, this time to the most family-friendly car service she could find. "I need a car seat for a 7-year-old, and please send your quietest driver. This is a special situation." 20 minutes later, a patient driver named Miguel helped Tommy into a booster seat. Understanding intuitively that this little boy needed gentle movements and quiet voices, Tommy clutched his elephant and stared out the window as they drove through the city, occasionally whispering numbers under his breath. "What's he counting?" Victoria asked Miguel softly. "My guess? Streetlights. Or maybe blocks. Kids like that, they find patterns in everything. It helps them make sense of the world." Victoria watched Tommy's reflection in the window and wondered what patterns he was finding in this night. In her face, in the promise she'd made to keep him safe. She wondered if she was just another adult who would eventually fail him, despite her best intentions. But as they pulled up to her building, Tommy spoke for the first time during the car ride. "Victoria's building is very tall," he observed. 47 floors. I counted. "You counted all the floors from outside?" "Tommy is good at counting," he said simply, and Victoria realized that maybe, just maybe, the patterns Tommy saw in the world might include her keeping her word. As the doorman held the elevator for them, Victoria felt the weight of what she'd committed to. In her entire adult life, she'd never been responsible for another human being's well-being. She'd built companies, managed thousands of employees, made decisions that affected millions of dollars a euro. But she'd never had to cut pancakes into exactly 8 pieces. The elevator climbed toward the penthouse, carrying a billionaire and an abandoned child toward a night that would change everything they thought they knew about family, about love, and about what it meant to finally come home. Asterisk. If you're hooked on this story so far, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Asterisk. Victoria's penthouse apartment had been featured in Architectural Digest twice a euro. 3,000 square feet of minimalist perfection with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park and furniture that cost more than most people's cars. Everything was white, chrome, and glass. Everything had sharp corners and clean lines. Everything was absolutely, utterly wrong for a 7-year-old boy who needed soft edges and quiet spaces. As the elevator opened directly into her living room, Victoria saw her home through Tommy's eyes for the first time. The vastness of it, the echo of their footsteps on marble floors, the way the city lights blazed through those enormous windows like 1,000 screaming voices. Tommy stepped out of the elevator, clutched his elephant tighter, and immediately put his hands over his ears. "Too bright," he whispered, his voice barely audible over what Victoria now realized was the constant hum of the city below. Too loud? Too much. Victoria's chest tightened with panic. She had no idea how to make this better. Her first instinct was to call someone her assistant, a hotel concierge, anyone who might know how to help. But it was past midnight, and Tommy was trembling now, overwhelmed by the sensory assault of her carefully curated life. Okay, she said softly, her voice taking on the same gentle tone she'd used at the airport. "Let's find you a quieter place." She guided Tommy toward her bedroom, which faced away from the street. The room was dimmer, softer somehow, with thick curtains that blocked most of the city noise. Tommy's shoulders relaxed slightly as they entered. "Better?" Victoria asked. Tommy nodded, though he kept his hands pressed to his ears. "Elephant needs a quiet place too," he said seriously. Victoria felt something shift inside her chest. A protective instinct she'd never experienced before. Of course. Where would Elephant like to sleep? Tommy looked around the room carefully, his eyes cataloging every detail with the precision of an engineer. Finally, he pointed to a corner near the window, where a reading chair sat next to a small side table. "There," he said, with certainty. 7 steps from the door. 7 steps from the window. Elephant likes 7. Victoria watched as Tommy carefully placed his worn stuffed animal on the chair, positioning it so it faced both the door and the window a perfect vantage point for keeping watch. The tenderness with which he arranged the elephant's torn ear, making sure it was comfortable, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Tommy, are you hungry? Or thirsty?" "Water," Tommy said quietly. "But not cold water. Room temperature water." Cold water hurts Tommy's teeth. Victoria nodded, filing away this crucial information. Room temperature water. 8 pieces of pancake. No sudden movements. Quiet spaces. She was learning the language of caring for someone whose needs were specific and non-negotiable, and she found herself approaching it with the same methodical attention she brought to corporate acquisitions. In the kitchen, as she filled a glass with lukewarm water, Victoria's phone buzzed with messages. Her assistant, her board members, her lawyers all wondering where she was, why she'd cancelled everything. What crisis could possibly be worth walking away from the Morrison deal? She ignored them all. When she returned to the bedroom, Tommy had arranged himself on the floor beside the elephant's chair. He sat cross-legged, perfectly still, his eyes closed in concentration. "Tommy? Here's your water." He opened his eyes and looked at the glass, then at her footageâ, still not making direct eye contact, but studying her expression with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. "Thank you, Victoria Chen," he said formally. "You kept your promise about elephant." The simple statement hit Victoria like a physical blow. How many promises had been broken to make this child so grateful for the smallest kindness? "Tommy, can I ask you something? About your parents?" Tommy's body went rigid. His rocking started again, subtle but unmistakable. "Mama," said Tommy, "asks too many questions." "I think questions are good," Victoria said carefully. "Questions help us understand things, and I need to understand some things so I can take better care of you." Tommy considered this for a long moment. "What questions?" Victoria sat down on the floor across from him, mirroring his cross-legged position. Something about getting on his level, making herself smaller and less intimidating, felt right. "How long were your parents planning to go to Paris?" 2 weeks, Tommy said immediately. "Mama said 14 days. Papa said it was a second honeymoon. Mama said Tommy would ruin the romance." Victoria's hands clenched into fists in her lap. "And they told you that you'd wait at the airport for 67 minutes? Mama said 67 minutes exactly." She showed Tommy on her watch. She said a nice social worker would come get Tommy and take him to a special place where he could get help. The cruelty of it took Victoria's breath away. They had planned this abandonment, timed it precisely, and lied to their child about what would happen to him. They had used his autisme, his need for specific time frames and clear expectations, as a weapon against him. "Tommy, how long have you known about Paris?" "Mama bought the tickets 6 months ago," Tommy said matter-of-factly. "Tommy saw them in Mama's purse. Mama said Tommy wasn't supposed to see. 2 tickets to Paris. December 15th departure. No ticket for Tommy. 6 months. For 6 months, this child had known his parents were planning to abandon him, and he'd said nothing. The level of powerlessness and betrayal he must have felt was incomprehensible. Victoria felt rage building in her chest. Not the sharp, clean anger she felt during business disputes, but something deeper and more primitive. The rage of someone witnessing an injustice so fundamental it challenged everything she believed about humanity. "Tommy, what did your parents tell you about why they couldn't take you to Paris?" Tommy's rocking intensified. "Too difficult. Too embarrassing. Tommy has meltdowns. Tommy can't eat restaurant food. Tommy needs schedules. Paris doesn't have Tommy's schedules." Each word felt like a knife. These people had systematically convinced their child that his needs needs, he couldn't control a euro, made him unlovable. "Tommy, look at me," Victoria said gently. When he glanced up briefly, she continued, "None of that is true. You're not too difficult. You're not embarrassing. You're a beautiful, brilliant boy who happens to have a brain that works differently. That's not something to fix or hide a euro. It's something to understand and support." Tommy stopped rocking. For a moment, he was completely still. Mama said, "Tommy's brain is broken." "Your mama was wrong," Victoria said firmly. "Different is not broken. Different is just different." Tommy picked up his elephant and held it close. Victoria felt her throat close with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart. Elephant is still perfect, even with a torn ear. And you're still perfect, too." They sat in silence for a while, the city humming quietly beyond the windows. Victoria found herself studying Tommy's footageâ euro, the fine bone structure, the intelligent eyes, the way he held himself with a dignity that seemed far older than his 7 years. This child had survived 6 months of knowing he would be abandoned. And somehow, impossibly, he had retained his capacity for kindness and trust. "Victoria?" Tommy said suddenly. "Yes? Why did you take Tommy home?" Mama said. The question shattered something inside Victoria's chest. She found herself thinking about her own childhood euro, not broken like Tommy's, but lonely in its own way. Parents who loved her, but were always traveling, always working, always somewhere else. She had learned early that achievement was love, that being perfect was the price of attention. "I took you home because when I looked at you tonight, I didn't see a broken child. I saw a boy who was brave enough to wait for someone who never came back. I saw someone who was kind to a stranger, even though he was scared. I saw someone worth keeping safe." Tommy was quiet for a long time. Then, in the smallest voice imaginable, "For how long?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria thought about the temporary guardianship papers in her purse, the social worker meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning, the foster care system that would eventually claim Tommy. She thought about her life euro, the travel, the 16-hour days, the complete absence of anything resembling a normal childhood environment, but she also thought about Tommy's precise voice, asking for 8 pieces of pancake. She thought about the way he'd arranged his elephant with such careful tenderness. She thought about how no one else at that airport had even noticed he was alone. "For as long as you need me to," she heard herself say. "For as long as you want to stay." Tommy looked directly at her face, then a euro. Not her eyes, but her face euro. And for 3 full seconds, he held that contact. "Okay," he whispered. Victoria pulled out her phone and began typing rapidly. Messages to her assistant about converting her home office into a bedroom. Messages to her building's concierge about child-proofing services. Messages to her lawyer about legal guardianship procedures. As she typed, Tommy curled up on the floor beside his elephant's chair and closed his eyes. Within minutes, his breathing had evened into the rhythm of sleep euro. Not peaceful exactly, but the exhausted surrender of someone who had survived the unthinkable. Victoria watched him sleep and realized she was crying. Not the frustrated tears of a business deal gone wrong, but something deeper. Tears for the childhood he'd lost. Tears for the parents who had thrown away something precious. And tears for the part of herself that had been sleeping until tonight euro. The part that had just learned what it meant to put another person's well-being before everything else. She made one final call, to her head of security. "I need you to research Richard and Diane Morrison," she said quietly. "Everything. Financial records, employment history, social media, all of it. And I need to know exactly where they're staying in Paris." "Ma'am, is this related to a business matter?" Victoria looked at Tommy's sleeping form, still clutching his elephant even in sleep. "Yes," she said coldly. "This is very much a business matter." The next morning arrived with pale winter sunlight filtering through the bedroom curtains. Victoria had spent the night in the reading chair, keeping watch over Tommy, dozing fitfully, while her mind raced through logistics and legalities and the overwhelming reality of what she'd committed to. Tommy woke at exactly 6:37 Euro. Victoria noticed he checked the clock immediately upon opening his eyes. His morning routine was precise. Arrange elephant carefully. Check that his few belongings were exactly where he'd left them. Then sit quietly until Victoria acknowledged that he was awake. "Good morning, Tommy," she said softly. "Good morning, Victoria Chen. Today is December 16th. Yesterday was December 15th. Yesterday was the day Mama and Papa went to Paris." The matter-of-fact way he stated these facts broke Victoria's heart all over again. For Tommy, time was measured in befores and afters a euro, before his abandonment and after. "Today is a new day," Victoria said gently. "Today we figure out what comes next." In the kitchen, Victoria discovered that making breakfast for a child with specific needs was like conducting a symphony, where every note had to be perfect. 8 pieces of pancake, cut precisely. Room temperature orange juice, served in a glass with no ice. Everything arranged on the plate in a specific pattern that Tommy had described with mathematical precision. As they ate, Victoria's phone rang constantly. Her assistant, her board, the social worker confirming their 10 a.m. meeting. Victoria answered none of them. Her entire focus was on Tommy, who ate his 8 pieces of pancake methodically, counting each bite. "Tommy, the social worker is coming to visit us this morning. She needs to talk to both of us about what's best for you." Tommy's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "Social worker takes Tommy away?" "Not necessarily," Victoria said carefully. "She wants to make sure you're safe and happy. Tommy needs elephant. Tommy needs quiet. Tommy needs 8 pieces of pancake." He paused, considering. Tommy needs Victoria to keep promises. The simplicity of his needs a euro, basic safety, routine, and trust a euro, contrasted sharply with the complexity Victoria was discovering in the legal and emotional realities of guardianship. Her lawyer had already called twice, explaining the intricacies of emergency custody, biological parent rights, and the foster care system. But as Victoria watched Tommy carefully arrange his napkin beside his plate, she realized that all the legal complexities in the world couldn't change one fundamental truth. This child trusted her, and she would not betray that trust. At 10 a.m. sharp, Margaret Rodriguez, from Child Protective Services, knocked on Victoria's door. She was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes, and the patient demeanor of someone who had seen every possible family configuration and crisis. Tommy immediately moved to Victoria's side when the stranger entered, not hiding behind her, but positioning himself where he could monitor both the newcomer and the exit routes. "Tommy," Margaret said gently. "I'm Margaret. I'm here to make sure you're okay, and to talk about what's going to happen next." "Tommy is okay," he said formally. "Victoria keeps promises." Victoria made 8 pieces of pancake. Victoria let Elephant sleep in the chair. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. She turned to Victoria. "Miss Chen, I have to tell you, this is highly unusual. Billionaire tech executives don't typically become emergency guardians for abandoned children. Unusual circumstances call for unusual responses," Victoria replied. "Tell me about last night. How did Tommy handle the transition to your home?" Victoria described the sensory overwhelm, the careful accommodation of Tommy's needs, the way they'd found solutions together. As she spoke, she watched Margaret taking notes, occasionally glancing at Tommy, who remained close to Victoria's side. "Tommy," Margaret said, addressing the boy directly. "How do you feel about staying here with Victoria?" Tommy considered the question with his characteristic precision. Victoria's house is very quiet. Victoria remembers about 8 pieces. Victoria doesn't lie about 67 minutes. Margaret's pen stopped moving. 67 minutes? Victoria explained about the cruel precision of the abandonment timeline, watching Margaret's expression shift from professional neutrality to barely contained outrage. "I've been doing this job for 20 years, Margaret said quietly. "But the calculated nature of this abandonment, it's beyond anything I've encountered." "What are my options?" Victoria asked. "Legally, I mean. If I want to pursue permanent guardianship." Margaret looked between Victoria and Tommy, who was now quietly organizing a small stack of magazines with mathematical precision. "Miss Chen, permanent guardianship is a massive commitment. This child has complex needs. He's experienced severe trauma. Are you prepared for therapy appointments, special education advocacy, behavioral challenges?" Victoria thought about her calendar, perpetually packed with meetings and travel. She thought about her sterile apartment, her complete lack of parenting experience, her ignorance about autism and child development. Then she looked at Tommy, carefully arranging magazines in perfect stacks of 7. "I'm prepared to learn," she said. "I'm prepared to restructure my entire life if that's what Tommy needs." "And what about when it gets difficult? When the media attention dies down and reality sets in, children like Tommy don't get easier euro. They need consistency, long-term commitment." Victoria felt a flash of her old boardroom steel. "Miss Rodriguez, I've built a $3 billion company from nothing. I've never walked away from a challenge once I've committed to it. I'm not about to start with something a euro, someone euro, this important." Margaret studied her for a long moment, then turned to Tommy. "Tommy, if you could choose where to live, what would you choose?" Tommy's answer was immediate and clear. "With Victoria Chen." Victoria doesn't leave Tommy at airports. The social worker closed her notebook and leaned back in her chair. "Normally, I'd recommend transitioning Tommy to a specialized foster family with experience in autism care. But—" She paused, watching as Tommy unconsciously moved closer to Victoria when he heard the word foster. "This child has formed an attachment to you in less than 24 hours. Given his trauma history, disrupting that bond could be devastating." Victoria felt something tight in her chest begin to relax. "What are you recommending?" "Brew. I'm recommending a trial period. Supervised visits, regular check-ins, required parenting classes, and mandatory therapy for Tommy to process his abandonment trauma. If things go well, we can discuss permanent guardianship in 6 months." Tommy looked up at Victoria with those brilliant blue eyes. 6 months is 183 days, he said quietly. 183 days is longer than 67 minutes. Victoria knelt down to his level. "Tommy, do you want to stay here for 183 days? "Yes, please, Victoria Chen." As Margaret gathered her paperwork and prepared to leave, she pulled Victoria aside. "Miss Chen, I need you to understand something. Tommy's parents could theoretically return and fight for custody. Abandonment doesn't automatically terminate parental rights." Victoria felt her jaw clench. "Are you saying they could come back and reclaim him?" "It's possible. Though given the documented abandonment, it would be an uphill battle for them. But you should be prepared for that possibility." That afternoon, after Margaret left, and Tommy was carefully arranging his few belongings in what was now being converted into his bedroom, Victoria made another call to her head of security. "What did you find on the Morrisons?" "Quite a bit, ma'am. They're currently at the Hotel Plaza Athénée in Paris." posted multiple social media photos of romantic dinners, tours of the Louvre, shopping on the Champs, Élysées, not a single mention of their son. Victoria felt that cold rage building again. Anything else? Financial records show they've been planning this trip for months. Also, her security chief's voice became carefully neutral. There are medical bills, substantial ones, autism therapy, behavioral specialists, private school tuition. It appears they've been struggling financially with Tommy's care needs. Victoria stared out her window at Central Park, where children played on swings, and parents pushed strollers, and normal families lived normal lives. Somewhere in Paris, Richard and Diane Morrison were enjoying wine and museums, while their abandoned son learned to trust a stranger with his deepest needs. "I want you to send someone to Paris," Victoria said coldly. "I want to deliver a message to the Morrisons." "What kind of message, ma'am?" Victoria looked toward Tommy's new room, where he was carefully arranging his elephant on what was now his own chair. In his own space, where no one would ever again promise to return in 67 minutes. "The kind that makes them understand exactly what they've lost," she said. "And exactly what it's going to cost them." Asterisk. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Asterisk. 3 days later, Victoria's private jet touched down at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. She had left Tommy in the capable hands of Margaret Rodriguez and a specialized caregiver, but not before spending 2 hours explaining every detail of his routine, his needs, and his fears. Tommy had clung to her hand at the door, his bright blue eyes wide with the terror of another abandonment. "Victoria comes back," he had whispered, more statement than question. "I come back," Victoria had promised, kneeling to his eye level. "In exactly 3 days, 72 hours. I will call you every 12 hours so you can count down with me." Now, as her car pulled up to the Hotel Plaza, Athénée, Victoria felt a cold fury settling in her chest like ice. Through her investigation, she had learned everything about Richard and Diane Morrison Euro, their financial struggles, their mounting medical bills, their growing resentment toward their son's needs. But she had also discovered something else. They had been planning this abandonment for almost a year, consulting lawyers about their options, researching residential facilities, and ultimately deciding that Paris would provide the perfect cover for walking away from their difficult child. The hotel lobby was all marble and gold, the kind of European luxury that whispered old money and refined taste. Victoria's Louboutins clicked across the floor with predatory precision as she approached the concierge. "I need to speak with Richard and Diane Morrison," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "They're guests of yours." The concierge, a thin man with impeccable manners, glanced at his computer. "Madame, I'm afraid I cannot disturb our guests without a euro." Victoria placed her business card on the marble counter. "Tell them Victoria Chen, from Technova Solutions, needs to speak with them immediately. Tell them it's about their son." 20 minutes later, Victoria sat in the hotel's private lounge, watching Richard and Diane Morrison walk toward her table. They moved like people without a care in the world a euro. Richard in an expensive cashmere coat, Diane in designer boots that probably cost more than most people's rent. They looked rested, relaxed, glowing with the kind of happiness that came from finally being free of an unwanted burden. Victoria felt her jaw clench as they approached. "Miss Chen?" Richard extended his hand with a practiced business smile. "I have to admit, we're surprised to hear from you. Is this about some kind of investment opportunity?" Victoria didn't shake his hand. She gestured for them to sit, her eyes cold as winter steel. "This is about Tommy," she said quietly. The change in their expressions was instant and telling. Richard's smile faltered. Diane's face went pale. They exchanged a glance that spoke of shared guilt and carefully rehearsed explanations. "I'm sorry. We don't know what you're talking about," Diane said, her voice too bright, too casual. Victoria felt her composure crack slightly. "Your 7-year-old son. The one you abandoned at LaGuardia Airport 3 days ago. The one who waited for exactly 67 minutes because you told him someone would come for him." Diane's hand went to her throat. Richard straightened in his chair, switching to defensive mode. "Look, I don't know what kind of game this is," Richard said, "but we're on vacation. We don't have to listen trois euro." "Sit down," Victoria said, her voice carrying the same icy authority that had built her empire. "Both of you." "Now," something in her tone made them both freeze. They sat. Victoria opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder of footageâ security footage from the airport. Images of Tommy crying on the bench, pictures of him clutching his elephant while surrounded by strangers. She spread them across the table like evidence in a trial. "This is what you did," she said quietly. "This is what abandoning your child looks like." Diane started crying immediately. Not the deep sobs of genuine remorse, but the shallow tears of someone who had been caught. Richard's face hardened into the expression of a man preparing to fight. "You don't understand," Diane whispered. "You don't know what it's like. The meltdowns, the special diets, the therapy appointments. We couldn't go anywhere, couldn't do anything. Our marriage was falling apart. So you decided to throw away your child like garbage?" Victoria said coldly. "He'll be better off," Richard snapped, his mask slipping completely. "In a facility with trained professionals who know how to handle kids like that. We were never cut out for what he needs." Victoria leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting. "Let me tell you what Tommy needs. He needs 8 pieces of pancake cut precisely. He needs room-temperature water. He needs quiet spaces and people who keep their promises. He needs someone to arrange his stuffed elephant just right and to count streetlights with him from the car window." Her voice grew harder. "He needs parents who don't see him as a burden to be discarded." "What do you want from us?" Diane asked, wiping her eyes with a designer tissue. Victoria smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "I want you to sign these," she said, pulling out a thick legal document. "Voluntary termination of parental rights. I want you to legally acknowledge that you are unfit parents who have abandoned your child, and I want you to disappear from Tommy's life forever." Richard's face flushed red. "You can't blackmail us. You can't just a euro." "Actually, I can." Victoria's voice was silk over steel. "You see, I've spent the last 3 days documenting everything. Your financial records showing you stopped paying for Tommy's therapy 6 months ago. Your internet search history about options for difficult autistic children. Your travel plans that deliberately excluded your son. Your social media posts from this trip showing your celebration of freedom." She leaned back in her chair, watching their faces crumble as they realized the scope of their exposure. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign those papers right now, in front of the hotel's notary. You're going to transfer any savings accounts or college funds in Tommy's name to a trust I've established for his care. And you're going to walk away and never contact him again." "And if we don't?" Richard asked, though his voice had lost all its bluster. Victoria's smile grew colder. "Then I destroy you. Completely. I make sure everyone you know, everyone you work with, everyone in your social circle knows exactly what you did. I use every resource at my disposal to ensure that the words child abandonment follow you for the rest of your lives." She pulled out her phone and showed them a news article draft. The headline reads, Tech mogul rescues autistic child abandoned by wealthy parents at airport. It includes your names, your photos, and detailed accounts of your son's medical needs that you chose to ignore. Diane was sobbing openly now. Please, you don't understand. We're not bad people. We couldn't handle it anymore. Tommy understands, Victoria said quietly. He understood when you started planning this trip without him. He understood when you lied about the 67 minutes. He understood that his own parents found him so unbearable they would rather flee the country than care for him. The table fell silent, except for Diane's muffled crying. Richard cleared his throat, his voice hoarse. What? What guarantee do we have that you'll actually take care of him? That this isn't just some publicity stunt? Victoria looked at him with disgust. The same guarantee Tommy had that you would come back for him in 67 minutes. The difference is, I keep my promises. She stood up, towering over them in their chairs. You have 10 minutes to decide. Sign the papers and disappear, or face the consequences of your choices in a very public way. As Victoria walked to the hotel lobby to wait, she thought about Tommy back in New York, probably counting the hours until her return. She thought about his precise morning routine, his careful way of arranging his elephant, his innocent trust in adults who kept their word. 8 minutes later, Richard and Diane Morrison signed away their parental rights. Victoria's flight back to New York felt like the longest 6 hours of her life. Despite her confident facade in Paris, doubt had begun creeping in during the quiet moments. What if Tommy had regressed while she was gone? What if he thought she had abandoned him too? What if her promise to return meant nothing against the trauma of his parents' betrayal? She called 3 times during the flight, speaking with Margaret Rodriguez, who assured her that Tommy was managing well, but had been checking the clock obsessively, counting down the hours until Victoria's promised return. When her car pulled up to her building, Victoria's heart was pounding. She took the elevator to her penthouse, her hands trembling slightly as the doors opened. Tommy was sitting in his usual spot on the living room floor, his elephant arranged carefully beside him. The moment he saw Victoria, his entire body relaxed, though he didn't run to her. Instead, he looked at the clock on the wall. 71 hours and 43 minutes, he said with satisfaction. Victoria came back early. Victoria knelt down and opened her arms. I promised I would come back. For the first time since she'd known him, Tommy initiated physical contact, wrapping his arms around her neck and holding on tight. Victoria keeps promises, he whispered into her shoulder. Always, Victoria whispered back, feeling tears she hadn't expected. Over Tommy's shoulder, she saw Margaret Rodriguez gathering her things, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. How did he do? Victoria asked softly. Better than expected. He had one difficult moment yesterday when he thought he heard your voice in the hallway. But when I reminded him about the 72-hour promise, he calmed down. Margaret paused. Miss Chen, I have to tell you, in 20 years of social work, I've never seen a child form such a strong, healthy attachment so quickly. Whatever you're doing, it's working. That evening, as Tommy arranged his elephant for bedtime and Victoria tucked him into his new bookedâ euro, specially ordered with weighted blankets and sensory-friendly sheetsâ euro, he asked a question that caught her off guard. Victoria, will Tommy always live here? Victoria sat on the edge of his bed, choosing her words carefully. Would you like to always live here? Yes, Tommy said immediately. Tommy likes 8 pieces of pancake. Tommy likes quiet rooms. Tommy likes that Victoria doesn't lie about minutes. Then yes, Victoria said, feeling the weight and wonder of commitment. You will always live here. This is your home now. Tommy was quiet for a moment, processing this information with his characteristic precision. Will Victoria teach Tommy to be less broken? The question broke Victoria's heart and filled her with fierce protectiveness in equal measure. Tommy, you're not broken. You're exactly the way you're supposed to be. But I'll teach you things a euro, how to navigate the world, how to advocate for yourself, how to know that you're valued exactly as you are. What will Tommy teach Victoria? The question surprised her. She thought about the last week a euro, how her entire life had reorganized itself around another person's needs, how she'd discovered a capacity for tenderness she never knew she possessed, how every business decision now came second to the simple question of what was best for Tommy. "You've already taught me the most important thing," she said softly. "You taught me that some things are more valuable than money or success or any deal I could ever make." "What things?" "Love that doesn't count minutes, trust that doesn't break when things get difficult, and knowing that the best investment I ever made wasn't in tech or real estate a euro. It was in you." Tommy smiled a euro, a rare, brilliant expression that transformed his entire face. "Tommy is a good investment?" "The best investment I ever made," Victoria confirmed. 6 months later, the legal adoption was finalized. Victoria Chen officially became Tommy Morrison Chen's mother, and Tommy gained something he'd never had before, a family that celebrated his differences instead of resenting them. The transformation in both their lives was remarkable. Victoria had restructured her entire company, promoting her COO to handle day-to-day operations while she focused on strategic decisions that allowed her to be home for Tommy's routines. She'd learned to cut pancakes into exactly 8 pieces, to recognize the early signs of sensory overload, and to find joy in the precise way Tommy organized the world around him. Tommy, meanwhile, had flourished in an environment of consistency and acceptance. His meltdowns became rare, his confidence grew, and his remarkable mathematical abilities found new outlets through specialized tutoring and enrichment programs. But more importantly, he'd learned to trust again a euro, to believe that the adults in his life would keep their promises. The media attention had been intense, but ultimately positive. Victoria's story of abandoning a billion-dollar merger to care for an abandoned child had sparked national conversations about autism acceptance, corporate responsibility, and what it meant to truly value human life. But the real victory wasn't in the headlines or the awards or the inspiration speeches Victoria was now invited to give. The real victory was in the quiet moments a euro. Tommy explaining his latest mathematical discovery over breakfast, Victoria reading him bedtime stories, both of them learning that love didn't require perfection, just presence. On a warm spring afternoon, exactly 1 year after that night at LaGuardia Airport, Victoria and Tommy walked through Central Park together. Tommy counted the daffodils they passed a euro 49, then 56, then 63 a euro, while Victoria simply enjoyed the sound of his voice, cataloging the world around them. "Victoria," Tommy said suddenly, pausing beside a park bench very similar to the airport bench where their story began. "Yes, sweetheart. Tommy is happy we found each other at the airport." Victoria knelt down to his level, looking into those brilliant blue eyes that had first captured her attention in a moment of crisis. "Me too, Tommy. Me too." As they continued their walk, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She had walked into that airport as a billionaire tech mogul focused solely on profit and growth. She was walking through this park as something infinitely more valuable euro. A mother who had learned that the greatest success in life couldn't be measured in dollars or market share, but in the simple act of loving someone exactly as they are. And Tommy? Tommy had learned that 67 minutes could turn into forever when the right person makes the right promise. He had learned that different wasn't broken, that his needs weren't burdens, and that somewhere in this vast world was a family that would never, ever leave him counting down the minutes alone. The security cameras at LaGuardia Airport had captured the end of one story euro. The story of parents who chose abandonment over love, but they had also captured the beginning of another story altogether. One written in pancakes, cut into 8 pieces, and elephants arranged just right, and promises that stretched far beyond any measurement of time. Some investments, Victoria had learned, return value for a lifetime. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.